Life Audio.
Hello. Thank you for listening to the Crosswalk Devotional. We are so glad to have you listening with us. Today's topic is the church. After a brief message from one of our sponsors, we will continue with today's devotion. Longing for the Church, written and read by Kyle Norman. My soul longs, indeed it faints for the courts of the Lord. My heart and my flesh sing for joy to the living God. When you were young, did you ever find yourself giddy with excitement when going somewhere? Maybe it was a theme park, maybe it was grandma's house, maybe it was a long trip. But internally, you were fueled with joy and excitement. Like a kid before Christmas, you just couldn't fall asleep. And if you did, you spent the night dreaming of what you would do when you got to your location. Have you ever had that experience on your way to church? Every block you pass on your way makes your heart leap into your throat. You are filled with excitement. I'm willing to bet not many of us have had that experience. But that's exactly what Psalm 84 calls us to. Psalm 84, it centers around a pilgrimage to the temple. For the psalmist, there was no greater thing than approaching the house of the Lord. The joy that is felt wasn't because the temple was beautifully adorned. The psalmist has a divine longing to be in the temple because the temple was the dwelling place of God, and to be in the temple was to be in God's presence. What's more, to be in God's presence was to experience the wonder of God's divine activity. Do we have a similar understanding when we step through the front doors of our local churches today? Or do we view the church only in human terms, as a place to sing religious songs, to hear scripture read, or to touch base with faithful friends? If we view the church only through the lens of what we do, we might fail to recognize what God does in our midst. Because the church is the place where we gather to meet the God who created, who redeemed, and who sustains us. And God is present in the church. In many ways, contemporary society has lost an understanding of sacred space. Life with God has become so individualized that we tend to downplay the importance of the church as a place of God. A common quip today is, I don't need to go to church. I can worship God as much on the golf course as anywhere. And that's true. But do you? Yes, God is everywhere. Even the psalmist understood that. But Scripture always holds that there is something special about God's house. Psalm 94 begins, "How lovely is your dwelling place, O God! How perfect, how wonderful, how magnificent is the place where God sets God's glory." See, for the psalmist, if God's presence was in the temple in some magnificent, unique, yet undescribable way, then there was no other place that he would rather be. We come to church to be in God's presence and to open ourselves to the divine activity. Because God is not just some passive observer. God never naps in church. God is always moving. God is always active. Whatever the denomination, whether you meet in a building with a spire or in someone's home, whether the church is liturgical or charismatic, this is the fundamental nature of the church that we are invited to enjoy. Intersecting faith and life. Psalm 84 declares that the Lord bestows favor and honor and does not withhold good things. Are you needing good things in your life? A good resolution, a good report, a good healing? Are you needing some reinvigoration of life, a sense of protection from whatever you might be going through. It may sound odd, and it may sound completely countercultural, but have you tried going to church? After all, what is the church if it is not the place where we gather to meet God's loving and grace-filled presence and to receive good things from God's hand? Of course, understanding God's presence and activity, it doesn't mean that things will turn around in a moment. Psalm 84 isn't a poem of prosperity, declaring that God will make us healthy, wealthy, and glad all our days. No, life with God is a journey. The psalmist says, "Blessed are the ones whose heart is set on pilgrimage." And the ones who receive God's activity are those who long to move closer to God, even when the path is rough or the hill is steep, and even in those times when we might think that the journey really isn't worth it. We are called to keep reaching out to God, because the rough times of life never discount God's presence and activity, and through the church, God always invites us to God's self. You may or may not go to church looking for God's presence. You may or may not feel like you need God to reveal God's self to you in some dramatic way. But God's presence and God's power defines the church. And the church, amid all of its flaws and humanness, is like a big neon sign from God saying, if you want to find me, you can find me here. Because even today, the church is the house of the Lord. For further reading, read Psalm 84 and What is the Church on BibleStudyTools.com.
The Crosswalk Devotional is a production of Life Audio and Salem Media. If you liked what you heard today, please take a second to rate and review this podcast in your favorite podcast app so that more listeners like you can find the show. For more faith-filled, inspirational podcasts, visit us at lifeaudio.com.